Sometimes the cruelest words come from the people who are supposed to love us the most. Sarah Martinez thought she knew pain when her husband left her with 3 young children and a mountain of debt. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment her own mother looked her in the eye and said, "You ruined my life." Those words would echo in Sarah's heart for years, shaping every decision she made and every sacrifice she endured in silence. Hi, I'm Tina, and I'm here with you today to share a story that will touch the deepest parts of your heart. This is about a daughter's unconditional love, a mother's pride, and the incredible power of forgiveness. Today, I want to take you on a journey that shows how sometimes the greatest victories come not from being right, but from choosing love over resentment. Stay with me until the end, because what Sarah discovers about her mother will completely change how you see family relationships forever. And if this story moves you the way it moved me, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our family of storytellers. Sarah was only 22 when her world collapsed. Michael, her husband of 4 years, had been her high school sweetheart, the father of her 3 beautiful children. Emma, age 5, little Marcus, just 3, and baby Sophia, barely walking at 18 months. They lived in a modest apartment in Phoenix, Arizona, where Sarah worked part-time at a local diner while Michael supposedly looked for steady employment. What Sarah didn't know was that Michael had been gambling away their savings and accumulating debts that would take her years to discover. The morning Michael left, Sarah found a note on the kitchen table next to Sophia's high chair. "I can't do this anymore. The bills are in the drawer. I'm sorry." That was it. No explanation, no goodbye to the children, no forwarding address. Just a man who walked away from his responsibilities like they meant nothing. Sarah's hands shook as she read those cold words. Little Sophia tugging at her pajama pants, asking for breakfast in her sweet baby voice. But the real devastation came when Sarah opened that drawer. Credit cards maxed out, medical bills from Sophia's birth still unpaid, rent 3 months behind, and student loans in both their names that she never knew existed. The total debt was staggering, $47,000. For a young woman making $8 an hour plus tips, it might as well have been $1 million. With nowhere else to turn, Sarah packed up her babies and drove to her childhood home in Tucson, where her mother, Patricia Lopez, lived alone in the small house Sarah had grown up in. Patricia was 58 then, working as a seamstress at a wedding dress shop, barely making ends meet on her own modest income. When Sarah arrived at the front door with 3 crying children and everything they owned packed into garbage bags, Patricia's face went through a range of emotions. Surprise, concern, and then something that looked dangerously close to resignation. "Mija, what happened?" Patricia asked, taking baby Sophia from Sarah's exhausted arms. Sarah broke down completely then, sobbing as she explained everything. Michael's abandonment, the crushing debt, the eviction notice that was coming any day. Patricia listened in silence, her jaw tightening with each revelation. When Sarah finished, Patricia was quiet for a long moment, looking at her grandchildren who had fallen asleep on the old couch, innocent and unaware that their world had just turned upside down. "You can stay here," Patricia finally said, her voice heavy with something Sarah couldn't identify. "But things are going to have to change. I can't support all of you on what I make. You're going to have to figure this out quickly." There was no warmth in those words, no maternal comfort that Sarah desperately needed. Instead, there was the cold reality of a woman who had already sacrificed so much in her life and now faced sacrificing even more. The next few months were a blur of survival. Sarah found a job at a 24-hour diner, working double shifts whenever possible. She would leave before dawn, work until late evening, and come home exhausted to find Patricia watching the children with the television turned up too loud, her face set in permanent lines of frustration. The small house felt even smaller with 4 extra people, and every day brought new tensions. Patricia had to give up her quiet evenings, her small luxuries like cable television channels she enjoyed, even her weekly visits with friends because someone had to watch the children. Her grocery bill doubled, her utility bills skyrocketed, and her savings account, which had never been substantial, began to dwindle rapidly. The seamstress work, which required concentration and steady hands, became difficult when 3 young children were constantly underfoot. Emma started kindergarten that fall, but Marcus and Sophia needed constant supervision. Patricia, who had raised her own children decades ago and thought those demanding years were behind her, found herself changing diapers again, dealing with tantrums, and losing sleep when the babies cried at night. Her arthritis, which had been manageable when she lived alone, flared up from constantly lifting and carrying children. Her social life disappeared entirely. The breaking point came on a cold December evening when Sarah arrived home to find Patricia sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of unpaid bills. Sophia had been sick with an ear infection, crying inconsolably for 3 days. Marcus had spilled juice all over Patricia's sewing machine, potentially ruining equipment she needed for work. Emma had been acting out at school, requiring multiple phone calls that interrupted Patricia's workday. The house smelled like baby formula and felt like chaos. Sarah was exhausted herself, having worked a 14-hour shift to cover for a sick coworker, hoping the extra money would help with Sophia's medical bills. She walked in expecting maybe a kind word, some understanding of how hard they were all struggling together. Instead, Patricia looked up at her with eyes filled with 20 years of stored resentment and disappointment. "Look at this," Patricia said, gesturing to the bills, to the mess, to the life she never wanted at this stage. "Look at what my life has become. I'm 60 years old, and I'm living like I'm 30 again, except I don't have the energy for it anymore. I can't have friends over because there's no space. I can't save any money because everything goes to feeding and clothing your children. I can't even have a peaceful evening because someone is always crying or screaming or needing something." Sarah stood there, still in her stained waitress uniform, looking at her mother's face twisted with exhaustion and resentment. She had never seen Patricia like this before, so raw and angry, and it frightened her more than Michael's abandonment had. "Mama, I'm doing everything I can," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I work every shift they'll give me. I'm trying to pay down the debt as fast as possible. I know this is hard, but we don't have anywhere else to go." But Patricia wasn't finished. 20 years of single motherhood, of working multiple jobs to keep food on the table, of sacrificing her dreams and desires to raise Sarah, came pouring out like water from a broken dam. "Do you know what I gave up for you when you were born?" Patricia's voice rose, and sleeping Sophia stirred in her crib in the next room. "I was supposed to go to nursing school. I had been accepted, had everything planned. But then you came along, and your father left, and I spent the next 20 years working dead-end jobs just to keep us alive." Sarah felt each word like a physical blow. She had never known about nursing school, never knew her birth had cost her mother such an important dream. "I didn't know," she managed to say, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I didn't know any of that." "Of course you didn't know," Patricia continued, her voice bitter with decades of suppressed disappointment. "Because I never told you. I never wanted you to feel guilty for something that wasn't your fault. But look at us now. Here I am, almost 60, and instead of enjoying some peace in my life, instead of maybe traveling a little or taking some classes or dating someone nice, I'm back to sleepless nights and dirty diapers and worrying about how to pay for everything." The house was quiet, except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. Emma and Marcus were asleep in the living room, curled up on the fold-out couch they shared. Sophia's breathing was finally peaceful, after days of fussing from her ear infection. But in the kitchen, something precious was breaking between mother and daughter. "I know I should be more grateful," Patricia said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow hurt worse than the shouting. "I know you didn't choose for your husband to leave. I know you're working as hard as you can. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. You ruined my life. First when you were born, and now again with your children. I love you, and I love them, but I can't pretend anymore that this isn't destroying everything I had left." Those words landed in Sarah's heart like arrows, each one finding its mark with devastating precision. "You ruined my life." Sarah would replay those words every single day for the next 15 years, They would echo in her mind when she was working her third job, when she was going without meals so the children could eat, when she was studying for her GED by candlelight because the electricity had been turned off again. But in that moment, standing in her mother's kitchen, Sarah made a choice that would define the rest of her relationship with Patricia. Instead of fighting back, instead of reminding her mother of all the ways Patricia had failed her too, Sarah simply nodded. "I understand," she said quietly, "and I'm sorry. I'll figure something else out." "No," Patricia said, exhaustion replacing anger in her voice. "You can't go anywhere else, and we both know it. We're stuck with each other, and we'll have to make the best of it. But I needed you to know how I feel. I needed you to understand what this is costing me." From that night forward, something changed between them. Patricia continued to watch the children, but there was a distance now, a careful politeness that replaced the easy affection they had once shared. Sarah worked even harder, taking on weekend shifts, babysitting for neighbors, anything to bring in extra money and prove she wasn't the burden her mother believed her to be. You know, friends, as I share Sarah's story with you, I can't help but think about how many of us carry words like these in our hearts. Maybe it wasn't a parent, maybe it was a spouse or a sibling or a friend, but we all know the pain of hearing someone we love tell us we've ruined something precious. If you're listening to this and remembering your own moment like Sarah's, I want you to know you're not alone. Please take a moment to like this video if it's touching your heart, and subscribe to join our family. I read every single comment, and I'd love to know, have you ever had to choose between defending yourself and preserving a relationship? Share your story with us in the comments below. The months that followed were a masterclass in survival. Sarah discovered strength she never knew she possessed, working sometimes 18 hours a day between the diner, cleaning houses on weekends, and taking in ironing from Patricia's co-workers at the dress shop. Every penny went toward the mounting debt or household expenses. Sarah's hands became permanently stained from dishwater and cleaning chemicals. Her back ached constantly from bending over tables and scrubbing floors. But slowly, painfully slowly, she began to chip away at the $47,000 that had seemed impossible to overcome. Patricia, meanwhile, retreated into herself. She fulfilled her grandmother duties with mechanical efficiency, feeding the children, making sure they were clean and safe, helping with homework when necessary. But the spontaneous hugs, the bedtime stories, the little treats and surprises that had once been Patricia's joy and grandmotherhood became rare treasures. She built invisible walls around her heart, protecting herself from further disappointment and resentment. The children felt the change too. Emma, sensitive and observant, began trying to be perfect all the time, cleaning up after her younger siblings and speaking in whispers so as not to disturb Grandma Patricia. Marcus became clingy, sensing the tension in the house even if he couldn't understand its source. Sophia, still too young to fully comprehend the dynamics, nonetheless seemed to cry more often, as if she could feel the stress radiating from the adults around her. By the time Emma turned 8, Sarah had managed to pay off nearly half of the debt that Michael had left behind. It had taken 3 years of backbreaking work, of going without new clothes, of celebrating birthdays with homemade cakes and dollar store decorations. But Sarah had also managed to get her GED and was taking night classes at the community college, studying to become a licensed practical nurse. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was pursuing the same career her mother had once dreamed of. Patricia watched Sarah's progress with complicated emotions. Part of her was proud of her daughter's determination and resilience. Sarah had proven herself to be stronger and more capable than Patricia had ever imagined. But another part of Patricia felt even more resentful, seeing Sarah achieve the very dreams that had once been stolen from her. It seemed cruel that Sarah could work and study simultaneously while raising 3 children, when Patricia had felt she couldn't manage even the studying part with just 1 child years ago. The tension came to a head one evening when Sarah received news that she had been accepted into the nursing program at Phoenix Community College. The program was competitive, and Sarah's acceptance meant she had scored in the top 10% of applicants. She came home from her evening shift at the diner, exhausted but glowing with excitement. The acceptance letter clutched in her hands like a treasure. "Mama, look," Sarah said, finding Patricia in the living room, mending a wedding dress by lamplight. "I got accepted into the nursing program. I start in the fall." Sarah's voice was filled with hope and pride, the first genuine joy Patricia had heard from her daughter in years. Patricia looked at the letter, reading the formal language of congratulations and enrollment requirements. For a moment, her face softened, and Sarah thought she saw a glimpse of the mother who had once braided her hair and helped her with science projects. But then Patricia's expression hardened again, and she handed the letter back without a word. "This means I'll have to adjust my schedule," Patricia said finally, her voice neutral and businesslike. "The nursing program has day classes. Someone will need to watch Sophia during the day, and Marcus won't start kindergarten until next year. I suppose I'll have to quit my job at the dress shop." Sarah's heart sank. She had hoped for congratulations, maybe even a hug. Instead, she was faced with the reality of asking her mother for yet another sacrifice. "Maybe I could find a different program," Sarah offered weakly. "Something with evening classes, or maybe online." "No," Patricia said, folding the wedding dress carefully and setting it aside. "You've worked too hard to get this opportunity. We'll figure it out." But there was no joy in her acceptance, no maternal pride in her daughters' achievement, just the weary resignation of a woman who had given up expecting happiness for herself. The nursing program was rigorous and demanding. Sarah attended classes from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, then rushed home to spend time with the children before heading to her evening shift at the diner. She studied during her breaks at work, highlighting textbooks under the harsh fluorescent lights of the restaurant's back office. Her notebooks were stained with coffee and grease, but her grades were exceptional. Patricia, meanwhile, had indeed quit her job at the dress shop to provide full-time childcare. The loss of her income meant the family's budget became even tighter, and Patricia had to give up the few remaining pleasures in her life: her weekly hair appointments, her subscription to romance novels, even the premium coffee she had allowed herself as a small luxury. She spent her days changing diapers, mediating fights between Emma and Marcus, and feeling increasingly isolated from the adult world. The resentment grew deeper with each passing month. Patricia would watch other women her age at the grocery store, dressed nicely and chatting about their jobs or their travel plans, and she would feel the weight of her circumstances like chains around her ankles. She was trapped in a life she had never chosen, sacrificing for children who weren't even her own responsibility anymore. One particularly difficult day, when Sophia had been teething and crying for hours while Marcus had a meltdown about wanting a toy he couldn't have, Patricia found herself snapping at Emma for leaving her backpack on the kitchen table. "Can't you see I have enough to deal with without you adding to the mess?" Patricia said harshly. Emma, who had been trying so hard to be good and helpful, burst into tears. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she sobbed. "I didn't mean to make you mad. I'll be better, I promise." Patricia immediately felt terrible, but the damage was done. She comforted Emma, but the incident left her shaken. She was becoming someone she didn't like, someone bitter and impatient with innocent children who didn't deserve her anger. That evening, when Sarah came home from her shift, Patricia was waiting in the kitchen with red-rimmed eyes. "I can't keep doing this," Patricia said without preamble. "I'm 61 years old, and I feel like I'm losing myself. I snap at the children when they don't deserve it. I wake up every morning feeling angry, before my feet even hit the floor. This isn't fair to them, and it's not fair to me." Sarah sat down across from her mother, still in her uniform, exhaustion written in every line of her face. "What are you saying, Mama? Do you want us to leave?" "I don't know what I want," Patricia admitted. "I love you and the children, but I feel like I'm disappearing. I have no life of my own, no identity beyond being your babysitter. And the worst part is, I know it's not your fault, but I can't stop resenting you anyway." They sat in silence for several minutes, both women trapped in a situation neither had chosen. Finally, Sarah spoke. "When I finish the nursing program, I'll be able to get a better job, full-time work with benefits. Maybe I can afford to put the kids in daycare, and you can have some of your life back." "That's still 2 years away," Patricia pointed out. "And even then, will you really be able to afford daycare for 3 children on a nurse's salary? Or will you need me to keep watching them so you can afford the rent?" It was a fair question, and they both knew the answer. Sarah was caught in the same trap that had ensnared Patricia decades earlier. The impossible mathematics of single motherhood, where childcare costs often exceeded what you could earn working. The system seemed designed to keep women like them forever dependent on family members who had already given too much. "I have an idea," Sarah said slowly, and plan forming in her mind. "What if, after I become a nurse, I don't just get a job working for someone else? What if I eventually open my own home healthcare business? I could make my own schedule, earn more money, and maybe even employ you as an office manager or something. We could be partners, instead of you just being stuck taking care of my children." Patricia looked at her daughter with surprise. Sarah had always been a dreamer, but this sounded different, more concrete, more realistic. "You really think you could do something like, that?" "I think I have to try," Sarah said. "Not just for me, but for all of us. The children need to see that hard work leads to something better, and you need to have your own purpose again, not just exist as my backup childcare." For the first time in years, Patricia felt a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this cycle of sacrifice and resentment. Maybe Sarah's determination could create opportunities for both of them. The next 2 years tested every relationship in that small house in ways none of them could have anticipated. Sarah pushed herself through the nursing program with a determination that bordered on obsessive, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working nights at the diner and raising 3 children. She slept an average of 4 hours per night, survived on coffee and determination, and somehow managed to be present for every important moment in her children's lives. Emma's school plays, Marcus's first soccer game, Sophia's first day of preschool. Patricia, meanwhile, began to find small ways to reclaim pieces of herself. While watching the children, she started taking online courses in business management, thinking about Sarah's idea of eventually working together. She discovered she had a natural aptitude for organizing and planning, skills that had been dormant during her years of survival mode. The courses gave her something to look forward to each day, beyond the endless cycle of meals, laundry, and childcare. But the real transformation came gradually, as Patricia began to see Sarah not as the daughter who had ruined her life, but as a woman facing the same impossible challenges Patricia had faced decades earlier. Watching Sarah study at the kitchen table after working a 12-hour shift, seeing her daughter's hands shake from exhaustion as she tried to understand complex medical terminology, Patricia began to remember her own younger self struggling to balance motherhood with dreams of a better future. The breakthrough moment came during Sarah's final semester, when she was required to complete clinical rotations at Phoenix General Hospital. Sarah had been assigned to the geriatric ward, working with elderly patients who reminded her painfully of her own mother. One evening, she came home looking shaken in a way Patricia had never seen before. "There was this woman today," Sarah told her mother, sitting at the kitchen table where they had shared so many difficult conversations. "She was about your age, maybe a little older." Her daughter visited every day after work, bringing her magazines and her favorite snacks. The woman kept telling me how proud she was of her daughter, how hard she worked, how she had overcome so many obstacles to become successful. Patricia listened quietly, sensing this story was leading somewhere important. "And I realized," Sarah continued, her voice breaking slightly, "that I can't remember the last time you said you were proud of me. I know I've put you through so much, and I know you never chose this life we're living together. But Mama, I need you to know that everything I'm doing, all this work and studying and struggling, it's not just for me and the children. It's for you too. I want to make enough money so you never have to worry about bills again. I want to give you the life you deserved to have 20 years ago." Patricia felt something shift inside her chest, a wall that had been carefully constructed beginning to crumble. "Mija," she said softly, using the endearment she had avoided for years. "I am proud of you. I've been proud of you this whole time, but I was so angry about my own situation that I couldn't let myself feel it. You're doing something I could never do. You're not just surviving this situation, you're actually building something better from it." For the first time since that devastating night when Patricia had told Sarah she had ruined her life, The two women reached across the space between them and embraced. It wasn't a magical healing of all their wounds, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that they were both victims of circumstances beyond their control, and that their only real hope lay in supporting each other. Sarah graduated from nursing school with honors, and within a month, she had secured a position at Phoenix General Hospital, working in the same geriatric ward where she had completed her clinical rotations. The salary was more than double what she had been making at the diner, and for the first time in 6 years, Sarah could afford to rent a small apartment for herself and the children. But instead of moving out immediately, Sarah made a different choice. She sat down with Patricia and presented a detailed business plan she had been working on for months. Sarah wanted to start a home healthcare agency specializing in elderly care, using the skills and connections she had developed during her nursing training. Patricia would be her business partner, handling scheduling, billing, and client relations, while Sarah provided the medical care. "I don't want to just leave you here alone after everything you've sacrificed," Sarah explained. "I want us to build something together, something that will give both of us financial security and the flexibility to be present for the children as they grow up." Patricia studied the business plan with amazement. Sarah had thought of everything: startup costs, licensing requirements, potential client base, marketing strategies. This wasn't a desperate scramble for survival anymore. This was a carefully planned path to prosperity. "But what about the debt?" Patricia asked. "You still owe almost $15,000 to those credit cards Michael left behind." "I have a plan for that too," Sarah said. "With my nursing salary, I can pay off the remaining debt in 2 years while we build the business on the side. By the time the business is generating enough income to support both of us, I'll be debt-free and ready to focus entirely on growing our company." Patricia felt tears gathering in her eyes as she looked at her daughter, really looked at her for the first time in years. Somewhere along the way, the frightened 22-year-old who had appeared at her door with 3 children and a mountain of problems had transformed into a confident, capable woman with vision and determination. Patricia had been so focused on her own sacrifices that she had missed witnessing this incredible metamorphosis. "Sarah," Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. I've spent 6 years focusing on what you cost me instead of seeing what you were building. You didn't ruin my life. You gave me a second chance to be part of something meaningful." They launched Martinez Home Healthcare Services 18 months later, operating out of Patricia's house with a client base of 12 elderly residents who needed regular medical monitoring and companionship. Sarah handled the medical aspects, while Patricia managed everything else, from scheduling appointments to processing insurance claims to maintaining client relationships. The business grew steadily, built on their reputation for compassionate, reliable care. Patricia discovered she had a gift for connecting with elderly clients, many of whom reminded her of herself, people who had worked hard all their lives and deserved to age with dignity and respect. She found purpose in her work that she had never experienced in any previous job. Within 3 years, they had expanded to serve over 50 clients and employed 4 additional nurses. Sarah had not only paid off all of Michael's debt, but had also saved enough money to buy a larger house where she, the children, and Patricia could each have their own space while remaining a family unit. The success of Martinez Home Healthcare Services brought unexpected changes to both women's lives. Sarah, now 31, had become something of a local success story, featured in the Phoenix Business Journal as an example of entrepreneurship overcoming adversity. But more importantly, she had achieved the financial stability that had seemed impossible during those dark early years. The children, now 12, 10, and 8, were thriving in their new schools, and Sarah had been able to afford things she had only dreamed of: music lessons for Emma, soccer camp for Marcus, art supplies for Sophia's creative talents. Patricia, at 64, had found a completely new identity as a key business owner and community leader. She served on the board of the local senior center, had become an advocate for elderly rights, and had even started dating again for the first time in over 20 years. Robert, a retired teacher she had met through their church, appreciated her intelligence and independence in ways that surprised Patricia herself. But the most significant change was in their relationship. The resentment and distance that had defined their interactions for so many years had been replaced by genuine partnership and mutual respect. They worked together seamlessly, each contributing their unique strengths to their shared success. Patricia handled client intake interviews with warmth and professionalism, while Sarah provided medical expertise with compassion and skill. However, success brought its own challenges. As the business grew, so did the demands on their time and energy. Sarah found herself working long hours again, not out of desperation this time, but because she was passionate about providing the best possible care for their clients. Patricia, meanwhile, was learning to delegate responsibilities to their employees while maintaining the personal touch that had made their business special. One evening in December, almost exactly 10 years after that devastating conversation in Patricia's kitchen, Sarah was reviewing client files when she came across something that made her pause. Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez, an 82-year-old client who had been with IOM them for 2 years, had listed Patricia as her emergency contact. In the notes section, Mrs. Rodriguez had written, "Patricia Martinez is like a daughter to me. She visits even when she's not working, brings me books from the library, and never makes me feel like a burden." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes as she realized how much her mother had healed from those bitter years of sacrifice and resentment. Patricia had not only reclaimed her own life, but had found ways to nurture others, without losing herself in the process. The woman who had once felt trapped and angry had become someone who brought joy and comfort to elderly people who needed both. That same evening, Sarah made a decision that had been forming in her heart for months. She had been quietly setting aside money from the business profits, not for expansion or equipment, but for something much more personal. She had researched nursing schools, prerequisites, and financial aid options. At 64, Patricia was not too old to pursue the dream that had been deferred so many years ago. Sarah found her mother in the kitchen, reading client charts and making notes for the next day's schedule. "Mama," Sarah said, her voice careful and hopeful, "I have something I want to discuss with you." Patricia looked up, noting the serious tone in her daughter's voice. "Is everything okay with the business?" "The business is fine," Sarah assured her. "Better than fine, actually. We're profitable enough now that we could hire another office manager to handle some of your responsibilities. Which is good, because I have a proposition for you." Sarah pulled out a folder she had been preparing for weeks. Inside were applications to 3 different nursing programs designed for adult learners, complete financial aid information, and a detailed plan for how Patricia could attend school while maintaining her role in the business. "You're almost 65, Sarah said gently. "Most people are thinking about retirement. But I know you're not most people. I know that somewhere inside you, there's still a 20-year-old woman who dreamed of becoming a nurse. And I think it's time she got her chance." Patricia stared at the applications with shock and something that looked like fear. "Sarah, I'm too old for this. I haven't been in school for over 40 years. I wouldn't even know where to begin." "You're not too old," Sarah said firmly. "You're the most intelligent, capable woman I know. You run half of a successful business. You understand medical terminology from working with me, and you have more life experience than any 20-year-old nursing student could imagine. That experience would make you an incredible nurse." Patricia picked up one of the applications, her hands trembling slightly. "But what about the business? What about my responsibilities here?" "We'll figure it out together," Sarah said. "The same way we figured out everything else. I can take on more of the administrative tasks. We can hire additional help, and your education will actually benefit the business in the long run. Imagine how much more we could offer our clients if we had 2 licensed nurses instead of 1. Friends, I have to pause here because this moment touches something so deep in my heart. How many of us have dreams we think are too late to pursue? How many of us have convinced ourselves that our time has passed, that we're too old, too set in our ways, too burdened with responsibilities? Sarah's gift to her mother wasn't just about nursing school. It was about believing that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. If this story is inspiring you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our family. I want to know, what dream have you put on hold? What would you pursue if someone believed in you the way Sarah believed in Patricia? Share your dreams in the comments, and let's encourage each other to remember that age is just a number when it comes to following our hearts. Patricia spent the next week thinking about Sarah's proposal, and for the first time in decades, she allowed herself to remember what it had felt like to dream about becoming a nurse. She remembered the excitement she had felt when she was first accepted into nursing school all those years ago, the sense of purpose and possibility that had sustained her through her pregnancy with Sarah. She remembered how it had felt to imagine herself in scrubs, helping people, heal, making a real difference in the world. But she also remembered the fear and disappointment when those dreams had been put aside. What if she failed? What if she couldn't keep up with younger students? What if she was fooling herself about her capabilities? The decision came to her during a routine visit with Mrs. Rodriguez. The elderly woman had been having a particularly difficult day, confused and anxious about her medications. Patricia sat with her for over an hour, explaining each pill and its purpose, holding her hand, and listening to her concerns with infinite patience. When Mrs. Rodriguez finally calmed down and thanked Patricia for her kindness, Patricia realized she was already doing the work of a nurse in many ways. The formal education would simply give her more tools to serve people she already loved caring for. "I want to do it," Patricia told Sarah the next evening. "I want to apply to nursing school. I'm scared, but I want to try." Sarah's face lit up with joy and pride that rivaled Patricia's own feelings when her grandchildren had taken their first steps. "Mama, you're going to be incredible, and I'm going to support you every step of the way, just like you supported me." As they filled out the applications together, Patricia felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: hope for her own future, independent of anyone else's needs or expectations. For the first time since Sarah had arrived at her door with 3 children and a mountain of debt, Patricia was making a choice based entirely on what she wanted for herself. 24 years after receiving her first acceptance letter to nursing school, Patricia held in her trembling hands a similar envelope. But this time, the circumstances were completely different. It was a sunny March morning when the correspondence arrived at Phoenix Community College, and Patricia couldn't stop looking at the official paper that confirmed her acceptance into the nursing program. Tears silently streamed down her face, wrinkled by time. But now they were tears of hope and determination, not of despair as she had cried so many times in the past. Sarah watched her mother from a distance, feeling a complex mixture of pride and emotion, knowing she had played a fundamental role in making this moment possible. Her daughter had meticulously planned every detail to ensure that her mother could dedicate herself to her studies without worrying about the responsibilities that had overwhelmed her for decades. Sarah had hired additional staff for the office, completely reorganized the work structure, and even convinced Emma, now a surprisingly mature 15-year-old, to help with administrative tasks after school. "Mom, you deserve this opportunity more than anyone I know," said Sarah, hugging Patricia firmly while they held the acceptance letter together. "All those times you said I ruined your life, now you can build the life you always dreamed of." The first day of classes was an emotional roller coaster that Patricia would never forget. She woke up at 5 in the morning, dressed carefully, choosing a blue blouse that Emma had given her as a gift and said was the color of hope. When she arrived on campus, Patricia felt simultaneously terrified and electrified. The classroom was filled with young students who could easily be her grandchildren, all equipped with gleaming laptops, modern tablets, and state-of-the-art smartphones, while she firmly held a simple notebook and a blue pen she had bought especially for the occasion. Initially, Patricia felt like a fish out of water, questioning whether she had made a terrible mistake trying to compete academically with people decades younger. But her concerns about not fitting in quickly dissipated when she realized that her vast life experience provided her with unique and valuable perspectives that her younger colleagues simply didn't possess. During classes on patient communication, Patricia was able to share real and touching stories from years of building meaningful relationships with elderly clients, bringing an emotional depth to discussions that impressed both professors and students. When they studied medication management, Patricia understood the practical and real challenges that patients faced day to day, challenges that the theoretical scenarios in textbooks couldn't adequately capture. She spoke about Mrs. Henderson, an elderly client she had cared for years who had difficulty remembering to take her medications, or about Mr. Thompson, who hid his medications because he couldn't afford them. Her instructors began calling on her regularly to contribute to discussions, recognizing that her practical experience greatly enriched the learning for the entire class. Sarah watched her mother's transformation with a mixture of amazement and deep satisfaction. Patricia had always been intelligent and extremely capable, but now she demonstrated a confidence and determination that Sarah had never witnessed before. The woman who for so many years had felt imprisoned, bitter, and full of resentment now pursued her dreams with a fierce determination that inspired everyone around her. Patricia came home every night with her eyes shining with excitement, sharing details about her classes, her colleagues, and the fascinating discoveries she made each day. Balancing school, work, and family responsibilities required constant adjustments and almost military organization. Patricia woke up at 5 in the morning to study before going to work, brought books to read during breaks, and often stayed up late doing assignments and studying for exams. Emma became an unexpected and precious ally, helping her grandmother with flashcards, organizing her study materials, and even cooking simple dinners on the busiest days. "Grandma, you're the bravest person I know," said Emma one night while helping Patricia review anatomy. "You're proving that it's never too late to achieve our dreams." The study nights became special moments of family connection. Sarah frequently joined them, bringing coffee and snacks, creating an environment of support and encouragement that strengthened the bonds between 3 generations of determined women. Patricia began to realize that her academic journey wasn't just about fulfilling a personal dream, but about demonstrating to Emma that obstacles can be overcome, and that education is a treasure that no one can take away from you. Patricia's graduation from nursing school at 66 was unlike any celebration the Martinez family had ever experienced. The ceremony took place on a warm May afternoon at Phoenix Community College, and Sarah sat in the audience with Emma, Marcus, and Sophia, all of them wearing matching blue shirts in honor of Patricia's Color of Hope. As Patricia's name was called and she walked across the stage to receive her nursing degree, the applause from her family was so enthusiastic that other families turned to look, smiling at the obvious love and pride radiating from their section. But the real celebration came later that evening, back at the house where so many difficult conversations had taken place over the years. Sarah had organized a surprise party, inviting Patricia's classmates, their employees from Martinez Home Healthcare Services, and even some of their longtime clients who had become like family. Mrs. Rodriguez, now 84 and more frail but still sharp as ever, had insisted on being there despite her difficulty walking. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," Mrs. Rodriguez told Patricia, gripping her hand with surprising strength. "You've been more than a nurse to me all these years. You've been hope itself. And now you have that beautiful degree to prove what I've always known about you." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Patricia found herself alone in the kitchen with Sarah, just as they had been on so many pivotal nights over the years. The kitchen table was covered with graduation cards, flowers, and small gifts from well-wishers, but Patricia's attention was focused entirely on her daughter, who was quietly washing dishes and humming contentedly. "Sarah," Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion she'd been holding back all day, "I need to tell you something I should have said years ago." Sarah turned from the sink, noting the serious tone in her mother's voice. "What is it, Mama?" Patricia took a deep breath, gathering the courage for words that had been building in her heart throughout her entire nursing school journey. "You didn't ruin my life. You saved it. Not just now, with nursing school, but back then too. When you came home with those babies, scared and desperate, I thought my life was ending. But really, it was just beginning differently than I had planned." Sarah sat down across from her mother, the same positions they had occupied during so many difficult conversations. But this time, the energy between them was completely different. "I spent so many years focused on what I lost that I never saw what I gained," Patricia continued. "Yes, I gave up my first chance at nursing school. But if I had gone then, I would have become a nurse at 20, married probably, had a predictable life. I never would have started a business. I never would have learned what I was truly capable of. I never would have understood the real meaning of resilience until I watched you demonstrate it every single day. Tears were flowing freely down Patricia's cheeks now, years of suppressed emotion finally finding its voice. You taught me that life doesn't end when your plans change. You taught me that sometimes the detours lead to better destinations than we ever imagined. And most importantly, you taught me that love isn't always convenient or easy, but it's always worth it. Sarah reached across the table and took her mother's hands, hands that were now marked by years of caring for others, hands that had just received a nursing degree, hands that had built a life of purpose from circumstances that once seemed hopeless. "Mama, we both did what we had to do," Sarah said gently. "You think I saved your life, but you saved mine too. When I showed up at your door, I was broken. I thought I was a failure as a wife, as a mother, as a person. But you took us in. You gave us shelter and stability when we had nowhere else to go. Without that foundation, I never could have built anything else." Patricia shook her head. "But I was so resentful, so bitter. I said terrible things to you. I made you feel like a burden when you were actually the bravest person I knew." "You were human," Sarah replied. "You were a woman in your late 50s who had already raised her children and deserved to enjoy some peace and freedom. Instead, you got 3 crying babies and a daughter who was barely keeping it together. Your feelings were valid, even if the way you expressed them hurt me." The conversation that followed was one of the most honest and healing exchanges of their lives. They talked about the lost dreams and found purposes, about the sacrifices that had seemed unbearable at the time but had led to unexpected blessings. They acknowledged the years of tension and misunderstanding, but also recognized how those struggles had forged them into stronger individuals and ultimately brought them closer together. "You know what the most beautiful part of this is?" Patricia said, as they finally prepared to head to bed. "Emma was watching today. She saw her grandmother graduate from college at 66. She saw that education and dreams don't have expiration dates. She saw that families can overcome anything when they support each other. That's a gift that will influence her entire life." And Patricia was right. Emma, now 17 and preparing for college herself, had indeed been profoundly impacted by watching her grandmother pursue her dreams with such determination. Years later, when Emma faced her own challenges as a young adult, she would remember Patricia's example and find the courage to persist when things seemed impossible. Marcus and Sophia, too, carried forward the lessons they had learned from watching their mother and grandmother transform hardship into opportunity. Marcus became a teacher, inspired by Patricia's example of lifelong learning. Sophia became a social worker, driven by the compassion she had witnessed in her family's care for elderly, clients, and each other. Martinez Home Healthcare Services continued to thrive, now with both Sarah and Patricia as licensed nurses providing care. Their business model became a template for other family-owned healthcare companies throughout Arizona, and they were frequently invited to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship and family business management. But perhaps the most significant change was in Patricia herself. The woman who had once felt trapped and resentful had discovered not just a career, but a calling. At 66, she was more energetic and purposeful than she had ever been. She specialized in hospice care, bringing comfort to families facing end-of-life transitions, drawing on her own experience of loss and renewal to guide others through their darkest moments. Sometimes, late at night when Patricia was studying for continuing education courses or reviewing patient charts, she would think about that angry woman she had been 10 years earlier, the one who had looked at her daughter and said those devastating words about ruined lives. She felt compassion for that woman now, understanding her pain and frustration, but she also felt profound gratitude that life had proven her so beautifully wrong. Friends, as we reach the end of Sarah and Patricia's story, I hope you're feeling the same sense of hope and possibility that fills my heart every time I tell it. This is a story about second chances, about the courage to dream at any age, about families that choose love over resentment, even when it's difficult. But most of all, it's a story about the mysterious ways that what seems like the end of one dream can actually be the beginning of something even more beautiful. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our family. Share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to pursue their dreams, or with someone who needs to remember that families can heal from even the deepest wounds. Leave a comment and tell me, what dream are you ready to pursue? What relationship in your life needs the kind of healing that Sarah and Patricia found? Remember, every ending is just a new beginning waiting to unfold. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love, forgiveness, and the courage to start again.